Tom Woods, historian, libertarian, Austrian, not the place, the ideas. Welcome to Dad Saves America.
Thank you, John.
So, we sit here today. It is Saturday the 13th. It's 4:40 Pacific time. And President Trump just had a bullet graze his ear in an assassination attempt. And it's going to be hard for us not to talk about that. And so we should try to talk about it. We're not a live show. I'm not a guy that does that stuff where I'm just popping in with my hot take. So what are you feeling right now about this? What's your first reaction as a thoughtful person that's a historian that knows that this is not the first time this sort of thing has been attempted? There have been others that have succeeded, as we know.
Well, of course, I'll clarify that the reason you give the exact time is so people know how little information we have right now, because it did just happen just before I came up here. I was a couple minutes late getting here because I wrote something about it to my newsletter audience. And mostly what I wrote to them was to say, in cases similar to this, let's say we're the opposite. Let's say Joe Biden had suffered something like this. The media spin is obvious and tiresome. It would be, well, this atmosphere of right-wing hate spilled over into this act of violence. But we know that it will not be spun that way when the shoe is on the other foot. And it's just tiresome. We know how the media is going to interpret everything. I mean, at least surprise me once in a while, for heaven's sake. But I don't like to be the kind of person who says that an atmosphere makes somebody commit violence, because it doesn't matter. No matter how much somebody criticized Trump or Biden, I would never do anything violent toward them. So I don't like to go down that road. But all the same, it does seem to symbolize something about where we are in the country right now. I grew up in the 1980s, and we had Ronald Reagan versus Walter Mondale in 1984. And, Walter Mondale was about the dullest guy ever to run for president. And you didn't have the sense that you absolutely hated him. Some people were unhappy with Ronald Reagan, but you didn't get the sense that, they wanted him to, be thrown into a vat of acid and suffer. You had the sense that, okay, well, we have different policy ideas. That really was how we thought. Sounds so naive now, but we really thought we have different policy ideas, but our goals are the same. We want to have a nice, livable America. And today you just don't have that feeling. And I feel like there are a lot of factors that are exacerbating this problem and making people take sides and become more tribalistic and less tolerant. And people congratulate themselves on their tolerance more than ever before. But the real test of tolerance is not how you treat people you already like. It's how do you treat and think about and speak about people you don't like or whose ideas you don't understand. And there, I think we're just living at a really disturbing time. Like my own kids, especially my 10-year-old, has never really lived consciously in an America where this wasn't the norm.
All right, real quick. If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It lets YouTube know that you want to see more Dad Saves America, and it helps spread the word. So it's one of the best things you can do to support what we're doing. And now, back to the show.
Now, I don't remember the exact year that President Reagan was shot.
81.
So it was like just the year after his,
Yeah.
really in the start of his term, really. I was thinking the same thing, that here we have this thought experiment, right? And that thought experiment goes something like this. If there was a time machine, would you go back in time and assassinate Hitler before he could do the atrocities that he would go on to do? And I think most people actually, even if they aren't sure they would be able to kill another person and pull the trigger, sort of theoretically knowing what future they might be averting, say yes, I could save 6 million Jews from the gas chamber and plunging all of Earth into a war to take down one person. I mean, I would feel pretty shaky after pulling the trigger and seeing the life exit another human being, but I would feel justified. I would do that knowing. And so we do have a situation in which this guy's been being called Hitler
Yeah.
by a lot of people who should know better than to do that, in terms of like just the sort of insult to the actual victims of Hitler that
Yeah.
you are performing when you call Donald Trump Hitler.
Yeah, he's the worst Hitler ever after his first term. Where are the concentration camps I was told were going to be erected?
And yet at the same time, so as sort of I'm not even sure if the word is irresponsible, because of such an ardent free speech advocate I am. But however bombastic and hyperbolic and silly and like sort of revelatory of your own ignorance, calling Donald Trump Adolf Hitler over and over and over again, and the death of democracy, and this will be the last election we'll ever have, all that super hyperbolic nonsense, I'm with you. The person responsible for this is the guy that pulled the trigger. Like, we're individualists. We believe in individual agency. So there's no collective guilt here. There is only the guilt of the person that heard all of that and said, whatever, I'm going to be the guy to kill the future Hitler of America. And that's on him at the end of the day. That's got to be on him. I don't think there's like a reasonable other path, because once you open the door to that, oh no, there's collective guilt, then, well, are we going to put all the media people in prison for calling him Hitler? Where do you go from there?
Yeah. I mean, I can say that I think maybe one thing helps contribute to another thing, but that doesn't make the one thing be the trigger puller. And at the same time, a lot of the people who lecture, who would lecture, let's say, people right of center for their inflammatory rhetoric, and they're going to lead to violent actions and so on. But these are the same people who, when Rand Paul was attacked on his own property by his crazy neighbor, said, I support Rand Paul's neighbor, without a moment's hesitation. And so you want to say, well, I think these people are hypocrites. They on the one hand, they're against violence. On the other hand, they openly say this peaceful man deserved to have this happen to him. But I think sometimes I'm not dealing with people who really care about hypocrisy. What they care about more is winning. As long as I win, I don't care if I have quote unquote principles. My principle is that I win.
One of the things that this assassination attempt brings into even starker sort of, I don't know if contrast is the right word, but starker sort of rhyming, is this extent to which we are living in this sort of bizarro, farcical replay of the 1960s. We have in the 1960s, especially like 68, you've got pandemic, race riots, assassinations, civil unrest, cities on fire, and this has now been the life in America since 2020, in particular, starting with COVID. I still think we are living, even in this moment, to some extent, we're living with the sort of psychological battering and trauma that the government imposed on this country with lockdowns and system-wide gaslighting and sort of instigating millions of Americans to turn on each other and become snitches if you're not wearing your mask. All that stuff has created this environment that feels shaky. How do you think about historical patterns? Like, is that a thing? Is there a rhyme? Is there a cycle?
Well, I think because of my individualism, I'm very skeptical of cycles. But I do think, nevertheless, that there are things that we can draw out of history that can be helpful. I don't think that there are neat little potted lessons that we take from history, that it's quite that simple. But I do think that, for example, there are patterns about when there's a crisis. Generally, as Robert Higgs would say, there's a ratcheting up on the part of the state apparatus. They tend to exploit the crisis, and then the crisis passes, but the powers that they grabbed never fully return to the pre-crisis levels. So that's definitely a pattern. And another pattern is after a crisis and during it, a narrative begins to develop that is eerily familiar each time. So in the 2008 financial crisis, the narrative was, you stupid rubes, see what happens when we leave you to your own devices. You go and blow up a housing bubble. And you haven't let the experts manage the economy to the extent that they should. So the not so subtle, not very implicit lesson there is we need expert management of society. Same thing with the Great Depression. This was capitalism run amok. It had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. It was capitalism run amok, and it goes to show we need wise management of the economy. Well, likewise with COVID, same kind of thing. That this goes to show that you need to allow the public health establishment to do what it thinks best, or otherwise you're going to have a boatload of deaths. In each case, the result is always to try to lend more credibility, transfer more power to whatever layer of expert opinion we're talking about. And so this is why, for me as a historian, as I observe current events, I feel the need to dip my toe not just into writing books about America's distant past, but also into current events. So I did write a book about the 2008 crisis. And I have written a book on the COVID crisis, and that is precisely so as to do what one man can to stop this kind of narrative from ossifying into the conventional wisdom. Because if the conventional wisdom becomes wise public servants like Anthony Fauci tried their best and sacrificed for the common good, but a bunch of stupid rubes who hate science stood in the way and prolonged this crisis, I'm going to pull what's left of my hair out. I can't let that happen. And so the more documentaries and books and testimonies that we have out there, the easier it will be for any future historians who want to be honest to find the truth if they're really looking for it.
There's some things that are trends that have their roots in technology change that we're experiencing, right? So I've had on this show Martin Gurry. He's got a book called The Revolt of the Public. And at the heart of it is that there's been these information revolutions that have led to really major social transformation. The Gutenberg printing press unleashing the individual's ability to read the Bible and thus the 30 years of war in Europe. The radio and the sort of empowering of a single voice, one to many.
Yeah.
And 20th century totalitarianism being among the things that at least it helped enable. And now in our moment, the internet, the fact that I can open this device and see a feed in real time, President Trump putting his fist up to say fight after nearly taking a bullet in the head. Which, to be perfectly honest, now that we appear to know, as of this recording, 4:51 Pacific time, on the did I say on the 13th, it appears that it was a bullet. It wasn't, and it did in fact lead to other people dying at this rally. I don't think I've got the balls to do what this man just did, to get up after almost getting shot in the head.
Oh yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Trump's not my favorite guy. This is powerful.
Yeah.
And I'm very off-put by this, the potency of icons of moments like this. There's this photo. I don't think it'll take me very much time to find the photo.
The iconic one already.
This is already like about as iconic a photo
Yeah.
as you can have.
Yeah.
Right?
They couldn't have asked for a better photo.
I mean, it's like, frankly, I hate to say it, but it's like old school, like Leni Riefenstahl from film school, like the low angle, the flag right behind.
I know.
Not to make a Hitler reference, but I mean,
We saw it with our own eyes. It really happened, though. You know, I mean, it's almost staged in its perfection. Is my point. You look at that image of him after he's gone through all the court struggles, which. Yeah, again, he's not my favorite person either, but I think the arguments against him are all dumb and obviously contrived because he's Trump and all that. And for him to somehow, apparently, have more or less emerged borderline unscathed from that, and then to have this happen, and he emerges with his fist in the air, I mean, that's if I were managing a campaign and my candidate had things like that happen to him, I would think I died and went to heaven.
What's going to come next is going to be maybe the most important test of him as a leader that we've seen, I think. In that, the way I think about leadership is that it's fundamentally voluntary at the end of the day. That a leader must bring people along through the content of their leadership, through the way they conduct themselves, through the vision they put forward, the positive vision. I actually fault Trump in the last debate for not having taken the opportunity to realize he was up against somebody who's clearly incapacitated, and it was so obvious to everyone watching. He could have spent more time talking about a positive vision than he did. He has a moment now where all eyes are going to turn to what he says next, what he does next, how he conducts himself. How do you think about leadership and how people who are in positions of power should, in a perfect world, make use of the bully pulpit moment? Okay, we're all looking at you, sir. What are you going to say? What are you going to do? And I know you and I are libertarians. We both think these people are all the worst.
Yeah.
They're never going to have anything but bad things to do to us. But we can't help. Leaders are a real thing. They shape our culture. How do you think about what he faces next, and what it means, even iconographically?
Yeah. I don't want to be perceived as giving him advice, because the fact is, he was in the White House, and I host the Tom Woods show, so he does know a little something, and he has had very good political instincts, even when sometimes he makes you want to pull your hair out. In this case, what I would do personally is give a speech along the lines of, now look, everybody, I understand. I'm not your favorite person. A lot of you folks out there, I totally understand that. And we have different points of view on a lot of really important things. But I would hope we can agree that, for heaven's sake, especially when we posture around the world as being this great model of the rule of law and blah, 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 that we can all agree that some people are taking this much too far. And we should all step back, drop it back a couple notches, and start listening to each other. Start listening. Your neighbor probably doesn't really want what's bad for you. He just has a different point of view. Talk to each other. Talk it out. Talk over some hard questions, but start off with the premise that you both are people of goodwill. There are plenty of people of bad will in this country. We just saw one of them take aim at me. But I happen to think that there are a lot of us who are of goodwill who have just become polarized by the news, the media, celebrities, the feeling that we have to take sides on everything now that we're all on Twitter and we're all on Facebook and you're expected to have an opinion on everything under the sun. How about we chuck that for a little while and just talk and listen and see if we can make some progress away from where I fear we're going? Because if this kind of thing starts to happen, I don't think we want to see where it ends. I would give a speech like that.
The Supreme Court has just ruled about that the President of the United States has a certain amount of immunity in his acts as president. And I don't have a great handle on the extent to which I agree or disagree with this, because I haven't lived with it, and I'm not sure I'm even equipped to. Randy Barnett was on the show earlier this week, and constitutional law scholar. We talked about it a little bit, but regardless of the specifics of that ruling, one of the things I know was intended in the justice's writings about it, like Justice Roberts, is that we really don't want to go down the road of having a politics of lawfare and literal warfare, as we've experienced, looking at today, violence, criminalizing acts. That's the stuff of Brazil. That's the stuff of banana republics. That's the stuff of lesser nations than the United States of America. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about where we should take the legal process when it comes to our elected officials?
Yeah, this one's hard. Now, first of all, I did read some because we've had several because we're in the middle of the summer, and that's when you get in June you get a lot of decisions. And I've done podcast episodes, many as I can. I've done the one on the free speech question with the social media companies, and then
Missouri versus I forget.
it was
Murray versus Missouri.
yeah. Eventually became Murthy versus
Yeah.
but anyway, but this one is the one I did not read, so I don't know what the reasoning is. But I certainly do know that I actually thought to myself what was going on in New York against Trump. I heard Alan Dershowitz, who's love him or hate him, he's one of the great legal minds of our time, and he said this is the worst case I've seen in 60 years. And this is a guy who he doesn't gain anything by saying that because now he's been excommunicated by his friends on the left, and people on the right don't trust him for 27 other reasons. So now he's just out in the wilderness. He stands to gain nothing from that. But he said it was the worst case he'd ever seen in his life. And I thought to myself, and then you hear the governor of New York saying, in effect, telling other businesses, because there was other stuff too about Trump and money and properties and assessments of values of properties and things that all real estate people do all the time. And she told everybody, don't you worry, this isn't going to happen to you. This is just because it's Donald Trump. Like she almost came out and said it just like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, but see, that actually makes me more worried.
Yeah.
That you could actually direct the legal system in that way. Now, I think in some ways the case with Trump exposes a little bit more of what actually goes on in the legal system. I think a lot of times with people whose name isn't Donald Trump, and precisely for that reason, they can get away with coercing plea agreements out of people who are innocent, but what choice have they got? And I think it's pretty bad, but nobody notices it because we think of the justice system as one of the good things we have. It's one of the fundamental roles of government we're all taught. But then to observe that, and we all know what was going on there. We all know why this case is proceeding. Then you wonder, well, how safe am I? And then you read stories about people who are unpopular, who Visa and MasterCard won't process payments for their services anymore. We saw what happened in Canada, where it's perfectly patriotic to protest unless Justin Trudeau doesn't approve of the cause you're protesting for, in which case we're going to find somebody who donated $25 to you and make that person's life miserable. Yeah, that is a pretty bad road to go down.
There is this, we're here at Freedom Fest. A fair number of people here, and some of the guests I've interviewed would call themselves an anarchist or anarcho-capitalists. And for most people, that sounds like crazy talk. Yeah. What do you mean anarchy? What are you, some kind of lunatic? Yeah. But I think no matter where you are on the spectrum here, if you're, there is a disaffection with our political order.
Yeah.
And some people lean more like right wing and think like maybe are more favorable to Donald Trump. Some are less. But in general, we are our community of people, our friends and sort of like-minded folks, don't think the government's very good. I think it needs to change in radical ways, like quite radical ways, myself included. And I think one of the risks that we might face in holding that position is the dark call of a nihilism, of a let it all burn, of a black pill effect. How do you think about that? How do you entertain or assuage yourself of those feelings that no, it's good, let it all burn. We need to completely change this whole situation.
The trouble with let it all burn is after it's done burning, who's in charge? That's why George Washington was held up as such an astonishingly noble figure, because what normally happened with victorious generals after wars was not that they quietly retired to their home, but they became known as czars. They became known as whatever, generalissimo or whatever. And so for George Washington to do that, to say, okay, I have completed my commission, that's the end of it, and then on top of that, to voluntarily step down after 2 terms as president when there was no requirement for him to do that. I mean, it is said that the King of England said, it really is true that he truly is the greatest man who ever lived, or the greatest man in the world. He is the greatest man in the world. Because that's so unusual. They did kind of let it burn. And he didn't say, but so now I'm going to reconstruct it in my image. So I worry about that because I'm very much in a minority in my political philosophy. And I consider it highly unlikely that the people rebuilding are going to be people who think the way I do. So, and yet, it seems far more likely that a major change for the better would come in a sudden burst than that we would get there through gradual minor changes, because gradual minor changes all seem to work only in one direction. On the other hand, I'm thinking out loud here. I mean, on the other hand, there are some quiet changes even now that are moving, I think, in a direction that I prefer. So for a long time, if anybody said anything about the role that the American states can play in our constitutional order, well, they would be dismissed. You're a neo-Confederate or some kind, whatever it was. But the states are, I mean, according to Jefferson, they really are the building blocks of the society, and they can do some good. If the federal government's out of control, they can do some good. In the War of 1812, Daniel Webster, who later became a senator, was a congressman, said that if the federal government should even think about engaging in military conscription, Massachusetts would block that in Massachusetts. So, I mean, there have been numerous cases of people with very noble causes saying the states will stop this. We will stop this. And so what we've seen in recent years, and my friends at the 10th Amendment Center out in California have been at the forefront of this, is that the states have little by little started to become a little bit more imaginative, imagining what their role in all this might be. And so we've seen, for example, with things relating to marijuana legalization. Well, that's been happening in complete defiance of the federal government.
Yes.
But then on the other hand, we've seen, well, for example, in I think it was Maine, but some other places, and then eventually became a federal law, there were right to try laws in different states. If I'm terminally ill, there's an untested drug, I should have the opportunity to try it. That just seems like common sense. But the various states were just doing that. They're not allowed to do that. So to see that, and then during COVID, I was not that impressed with most Republican governors, but there were a handful who used the powers they have as governors to say, well, we're not going to do X, Y, and Z in this state. And this state's going to be a little bit different. And so we had a control group. We could actually see, well, what happens in that state if they don't do A, B, and C? So it turns out that the American federal system is more robust than I feared it had become. I thought it had atrophied completely. And then I might add, my friends out at the 10th Amendment Center came up with an interesting idea, because they're not in favor, as most of us are not, of what the NSA is up to. And the thing is, yeah, the NSA might tell us, oh, we're not engaged in dragnet surveillance and just grabbing all this information. But maybe they're lying to us. Like, how do I know? And so they have a big facility out in Utah. And you think, well, what could the states do on that front? Well, it turns out their facility in Utah requires an absolutely ungodly amount of water to cool the machinery every day.
Oh,
it is
sure.
ungodly. I forget the number, but it is astronomical. And one guy at the 10th Amendment Center, I think Mike Meharry, said, what if Utah turned off the water? They're not under any obligation to supply the water. See, like, that's how we need to think, creatively. We have think tanks with billion-dollar budgets who didn't think of anything like that, you know?
In an earlier video on our channel, I offered a little commentary basically suggesting that the path for this country is to Dobbs the hell out of everything. And by that I meant the Dobbs decision, which returned abortion policy to the states and stripped the federal government of its sort of de facto legalization in Roe versus Wade. Made it so that this highly contentious issue is now a state-based issue. I'm in Texas. I like that because I'm Catholic. I'm vehemently opposed to abortion. I think it's barbaric murder. Full stop. So I don't want it. I don't want it. Is it more complex than that because of the complexity of the rights of women as the carrier of the baby and that they have rights too? It is. And so in that respect, I say, look, in a morally perfect world, I would say it should just be banned altogether across from sea to shining sea. But I recognize this is a hard issue that is more complex than, say, slavery. And so let California be a place that I find like a morally repugnant hellhole. for abortion, but if that's what you want for your family and for your daughters, go have at it. I get to be in Texas. You know, that's what you're talking about with federalism, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And in a way, there's an analogy to if we think about, let's say, what were at one time called ladies of the night, let's say. Now, in the past, the way you would think about that is they don't call it the world's oldest profession for nothing. We probably can't stamp it out altogether. We have to be content with saying it'll be relegated to the bad part of town. And so the conservative point of view has typically been not that we can simply, by brute force, eliminate all evil everywhere. It's more that we recognize that evil is a mainstay of human existence, but we just simply do the best we can to hem it in. And that's what federalism can do.
Do you feel like the heat in our politics is a function of centralization? That what's happened today, that and the focus on the president, this single man being so make or break for all of our lives?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that part of the underlying problem with our strife?
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, because every 4 years we have basically a low-intensity civil war. You know, who's going to be the one imposing his will on the rest of us? And this is the great model that the whole world should imitate. I'm not so sure about that. And so I think that it would be better for us to argue these things out with our neighbors and not sit there crossing our fingers that some judges might make a decision. These judges are not deities. They're basically just politically well-connected lawyers, and we're just going to see what they say. That's the idea. I can't imagine that's the most humane way to govern 300 and some odd 30 million people, something like that. But you mentioned the person of the president himself. Again, I tend to like to refer to Thomas Jefferson. That guy would be appalled at the cult of personality that's developed around the figure of the U.S. president. Like, we know what his golf handicap is and all. If he's out getting ice cream, we know about it. Jefferson would say, "You shouldn't know. This is stupid. Like, he's just a guy, and his job." It's hard to believe, but the role of the president is to humbly execute the laws. It's not to launch an ideological reconstruction program on the country. It's not to make the world safe for democracy. It's to humbly execute the laws. And when you look at the historians' rankings of the presidents, the ones who humbly execute the laws are at the dead last slots. Dead last.
Calvin Coolidge.
Right, exactly. Who was the humblest executor of the laws of all.
Silent Cal, because people would go into his office asking for all manner of nonsense, and he would just stare at them.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it was just absolutely perfect. We would never be blessed with a guy like that again. But a lot of times people in history, now not always, this is not, as Mises would say, an apodictic certainty, but a lot of times in history when there's somebody both wings of the establishment love. So George W. Bush and Bill Clinton. If they both like somebody, you got to at least be wary. He might be okay, but you got to be wary. And a great example of that, when you ask Bill Clinton, who was your favorite Republican president? His answer was Teddy Roosevelt. Now, why was that? Because Teddy Roosevelt, a lot of the presidents of the 19th century, you never even heard their names before, you know? Benjamin Harrison, most people, Chester A. Arthur, James Garfield, nobody knows any of these people. But Teddy Roosevelt was larger than life, and he brought that to the office, and he left an imprint on it. I mean, Mark Twain said, Teddy Roosevelt wants to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. Now, you have a guy like that in the office of president, it's going to shape that thing and create precedents for the future. So he had, I think it was 1903, he had a summit of coaches and players in college football at the White House because he thought college football was getting too dangerous. What does that have to do with the U.S. president? Like, don't we have a civil society where the leagues can arrange this themselves?
Teddy Roosevelt did this?
Teddy Roosevelt did this.
I'm kind of surprised that there was college football. At
Yeah,
the time
that's
of
right.
Teddy
Yeah, and I mean, look, for heaven's sake, yeah, probably they're losing limbs, whatever. But the point, or he had a treaty that he wanted to pass with the Dominican Republic, and the Senate adjourned without taking action on it. And he was very impatient with that. So he said, well, how about if we just don't call it a treaty, and we'll just call it an executive agreement, and I will declare it passed. And that's what he did. And if the Senate doesn't like that, they can come back and change it, which of course they were cowardly then as they are now, and they just let it stand. When that guy becomes president, that is going to lead us almost inevitably down to where we are now, where this one man, we all look superstitiously to this one man. And I feel like our ancestors, whom we often like to laugh at how backward and primitive our ancestors were, as they're not as sophisticated and modern as we are, but they would be laughing at our superstitious reverence for this one man.
The structure of the Constitution sets up this challenge on purpose, this like these ties that bind and the separation of powers. It makes it hard to make changes happen. Oh, you want to do this? You need 3/4 of the states to cut on board if you want to change the Constitution. If you want to, get this passed, you need 2/3 majority of the Senate. You've got the Senate and the House. You've got the senators originally and properly appointed by state legislatures, so that technically they would be like representatives of the state interests, not just a higher version of your congressman. And then you've got the Supreme Court and the executive branch all in competition with each other, all designed to check power and also to constrain change and to moderate the whims of the people and majorities and fads, and also the whims of a tyrannical wannabe dictator. Have we crossed a threshold where those ties that bind have now locked us into having 75,000 pages of nonsense and a cult of the presidency that can't be unwound anymore? How do we... They did create a kind of ratchet effect on change and going backwards insofar as undoing some of this stuff seems hard in that structure.
Yeah, it is hard. I think some of the changes people want to make would be bad and make things worse. So on those days, when I think about that, I think I'm glad it's really hard to do anything. But on the other hand, I would say that sometimes because it's hard, I think what's happened is we've just decided, look, the Constitution is too hard to amend, and we want to do a lot of things that are not listed in Article 1, Section 8, so we're just going to go ahead and do them. And we'll come up with really lame justifications. We'll say the General Welfare Clause covers this, which it doesn't, or the Interstate Commerce Clause, or the Necessary and Proper Clause. And the thing is, we have all the commentary in the world about these clauses at the time. Even Alexander Hamilton, who wanted a more robust government, said that the Constitution in practice would be absolutely identical even if we had no Necessary and Proper Clause, which is the clause that your social studies teacher says allows them to do whatever they want. Well, Alexander Hamilton disagreed with that. So this is what in practice we now have, is that we have Supreme Court justices, some of whom are there just to put forth their policy preferences. Because look, the Constitution constrains us too much and it's too hard to change it. So we'll come up with convoluted justifications for what we want, trying to weave our way around all this language. And you see that in particular with the lionizing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And people loved Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Why? Because, quote, she fought for what she believed in. And I want to tell them that is exactly the opposite of what a Supreme Court justice is supposed to do. You are not supposed to fight for what you believe in. You're supposed to look at the facts of the matter, look at the Constitution, identify what the constitutional clauses in question were intended to mean, and we know that by looking at the ratifying conventions, and then make your decision. You are not supposed to fight for what you believe in. But for some people, that's the game. It's just, I just want to win. I don't need to have any principles. I just need to win. And the problem is, if somebody really is determined to win at all costs, and in effect tells you, I don't really have, my principle is that my side wins. I just saw on Twitter the other day somebody saying, it was a socialist, saying, the bourgeoisie will criticize me for not having principles, but you know what my principle is? The victory of socialism. And you wonder, if you have people who are that determined to win, regardless of what institutional constraints they're supposed to respect, are pitted against people who want to very carefully observe all the legal niceties. I'm kind of afraid that the more determined I'm going to win at all costs people are going to win.
As a historian, how do you think about what America is in the broader context of the history of nations? Because one of the things that's feels new is the extent to which hating America and saying that out loud, that this is a rotten country, has been mainstreamed.
Yeah.
That when I was younger, I'm 46. I'm getting to the age where you start to like be like, wait, how old am I?
Did I turn that age already?
Damn it. Getting close to 50. I remember when in politics, it wasn't that long ago that if you called your political opponent someone that wants to fundamentally change America and doesn't like this country, they would say, how dare you?
Yeah.
I'm a patriot.
Yeah.
Democrat, Republican. That was outside of the bounds. And now our academic class, for sure, the young sort of zombified graduate seekers who've infested the campuses with their safe spaces and trigger warnings, and everyone gets a trophy childhoods. That's all our fault. Are happy to do this. They've taken, King George said George Washington was the greatest man in the world. Well, I have a picture of him, of a statue of Mr. Washington wrapped up like an Antifa fighter in front of I think it's Georgetown University, as part of all these protests. Are we really that terrible? I mean, maybe we're not maybe we're not perfect as a society, but how do we rank in your eyes as a nation state?
Yeah, but okay, so I have two totally different answers to this. They both are pro-America, but they look at different sides of the question. So I think some of this is that, and when I say we, I don't mean the government. I mean we, those of us who make up the country. We don't satisfy certain, like Marxian tenets, and there is still, the things they don't like about America are actually those struggling remnants of goodness that are still here. So the remnants of meritocracy, like even if you say meritocracy, it elicits a snicker, and that's a really weird thing. Meritocracy just means if you're qualified, you should succeed. Like there's no artificial barrier should be put in your way. Like what's there to disagree with about that? But I think the United States is held up to an impossible standard because the United States oppressed A, B, and C. My gosh, these people must be extremely unwell-traveled and unread, because I'm afraid that oppression is the history of the world. It is the history of this wretched race of ours. And the U.S. has gone out of its way in every way, the British too, to abolish slavery around the world, to undo injustices. And the countries that many of these people unfavorably compare the United States to, I don't think they'd want to live there for very long. And so I don't particularly go, I mean, I'm very happy to criticize the U.S. government and say the U.S. government is guilty of countless outrages and moral enormities, but I think the country is more than the government. The country is all of us. The country is local baseball teams and your volunteer fire department and your Kiwanis Club and all these little things that make up the micro patriotisms of all our little towns, and you drive through them and they're beautiful. And some of them these days we drive through and it seems like a bomb went off. Like, I mean, America is suffering on a lot of levels, but you can still see some of that old American spirit. And then the other thing, do I have time for a longer answer? Okay.
You've got all the time in the world, my friend.
Okay, so I've heard about how you interview people. But here's my longer answer. When you think, a lot of times people, even well-meaning American patriots will say the United States is the best country in the world. But then when I watch the way they govern or they vote, they want to treat it like it's exactly like all the other countries. And what I mean by that is the United States was, from the beginning, as I said before, intended to be a collection of societies. That's why the Constitution refers to the United States always in the plural. The United States are, never the United States is. The Articles of Confederation, which preceded the Constitution, says in Article 2 that the states retain their sovereignty, freedom, and independence. Well, obviously, they can't retain that unless they had it even before the Articles of Confederation. So from the beginning, these were absolutely distinct societies. They were not somehow one people because they had all been settled by the British, because there are a lot of places that were settled by the British that are not part of the United States. So that's not right. They were distinct societies.
Well, and one thing I interviewed Gordon Wood last summer, and one thing that which was a real honor, and one thing that I was struck by that I hadn't really thought about is that, you know, if the first real settlements happen in the 1620s, and the Declaration of Independence isn't until 1776, you have generations of people who have lived on the colonies, an ocean away from Britain.
It's all they've known.
It's all they've known. It's all their parents and their grandparents have known. So the notion of those people as a distinct people who have come to be a distinct people in Virginia and in Maine and in Pennsylvania and Philadelphians and New Yorkers, and that identity formation, you had over 100 years. 150 years of identity formation taking place in these distinct places at a time when you didn't have airplanes and cars and telephones and internet to connect.
Right.
To connect everybody. Like, it was the before times.
Yeah. Jefferson, when he would say my country, he meant Virginia. So, but by contrast, we look at the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a revolt against all this stuff. Like the French revolutionary Sieyès said, France is not a collection of states. It is a single whole. And all is lost if we concede this point. And as we move into the future beyond that, we see developing all, especially in Europe, these large centralized states. And large states become like a mystical, self-justifying goal. Why do you want to have a big centralized state? Because it's a big centralized state. But we saw in the 20th century the grotesque crimes they can carry out. Totalitarian revolutions, genocides, total war. Because there's one indivisible, infallible, irresistible power center. The American Revolution was the American arrangement was in effect an attempt to block this and to have a different, so that power would be dispersed, as it had been throughout most of the medieval period, where I know the typical school child thinks that the king could do anything he wanted. No, he couldn't. In most of European history, there's no way he couldn't have an income tax. He couldn't conscript the entire society. He didn't have the authority to do it because he was hemmed in by all kinds of other institutions around him. But by the time you get to the 20th century, all you have is the central authority and a bunch of anonymous individuals, not individuals formed by their Virginian identity or their religious identity, but all this flattened out. And this was supposed to give us freedom because it gives us freedom from all these little institutions, which at times could be annoying and tyrannical. But what it gave us was an institution so powerful, because so little resisted by other institutions, that it could be responsible for in the 9 figures of deaths in 1 century. Like, this is an evil institution. And for the United States to just be just another one of those, and if the state defies the federal government, it's guilty of treason. No, that's what the original America was. It was an attempt to stop that. It was almost as if they could see into the future, and they were trying to stop that. It was a very, very self-consciously different way of organizing society. And today we speak as if the United States being a single, indivisible whole is some kind of sacred principle we have to embrace, when that is not what it was. And it being that makes it just like Spain and France and Italy and Germany. And I thought you just said it was the best country in the world and absolutely unique. Well, it's not if you're going to treat it like that.
In the video I'd mentioned about sort of Dobbsing the hell out of everything, I made a claim that I somewhat intentionally overstated, which is that our federalism, our decentralization, our protection of the sovereignty of states, in some respects was an accident in terms of its goodness, in that it was also a convenient way to hold these states together in the face of the profound disagreement over slavery. How do you understand the role that slavery played in motivating federalism, motivating the preservation of the states' rights, the states' sovereignty, their internal integrity?
Yeah. Well, I guess the way to think about it is, if provision hadn't been made for the preservation of slavery, at least where it existed, there wouldn't have been a union. That's the thing. Like, if you want there to be a union, then you have to make that compromise. I would have been perfectly, cause since I don't have this superstitious attachment to one single indivisible thing, I would have been perfectly happy having multiple unions. Why not? But there's no way the South is going to agree to an arrangement that threatens that institution. So therefore, you have to have federalism, or you don't have a union. And as I say, I would have taken I don't care, whatever works. And I think there's almost like a superstitious reverence toward the American Union, which is supposed to be just a utilitarian thing. If either it works or it doesn't. It's supposed to promote liberty. If it does, great. That was Jefferson's attitude. If it does, great. If it doesn't, maybe we could have 2 or 3 confederations. That shouldn't be like a bizarro, weird, not allowed thing to say. Like the exact number of square inches of the U.S. was not like sent down to us from heaven. It's a practical question, and we should just discuss it.
One of the things that this moment we will be talking about more vociferously out there in the world is civil war. Donald Trump's attempted assassination is going to cause that to be a louder part of our discourse, I imagine. And there are people who want that, who think it's no longer a utilitarian function, this giant thing. We should go back to, or go forward to, a crack up. Hey, I'm in Texas. Maybe it would even be good for me. I hate federal income taxes.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? How do you think about the path forward? I'm going to say a couple things, but I'll just say this. I do have a romantic attachment to the United States as it exists. I don't want it to break up.
Oh, and by the way, I recently accomplished the task of visiting all 50 states just a month ago. And I thought that was like the best thing I had ever done. And I even thought, now that I've accomplished that, I've been to the Virgin Islands. I've been to some of the territories. I'll try to get to all the U.S. territories. Then I found out how logistically difficult it is to get to American Samoa, and I decided I'm never going to achieve this dream. Another dream shattered. But no, I hear you. I have that same attachment. But in principle, freedom is more important to me than that attachment. If it ever came down to that, then I would have to say I have to give up one for the sake of the other.
Do you think we're close to that?
I don't, even though there are a lot of signs that point that way, but I think these are a lot of blowhards. I think most people have zero interest in taking up arms and wouldn't be good at it, wouldn't know what to do. My money is on that not happening. Now, on the other hand, I'm actually going to risk saying on an episode that could come out and embarrass me, but just to show that I am willing to go out on a limb, I likewise tend to go with inertia. If I don't know exactly what's going to happen, I tend to assume it'll probably be roughly the same. And I think American life will probably be roughly the same. It might continue to drift in ways I don't approve of, but I don't think there'll be civil war any more than I think Biden will drop out. Now, I could be wrong about that, and it'll look bad, but I'll just go to show I'm a human being who makes mistakes and doesn't mind letting you know that he might make mistakes, only because I think there are insurmountable obstacles right now.
This is what we face now, right? In 2024. We face someone who, I'm just going to say, most likely appears to be suffering from degenerative Parkinson's disease or something akin to it, and is not functional in a way that threatens the safety and security of the nation on the global stage.
But he's available from 10 to 4 if you need anything.
He is. Yeah. So just he can't use Hillary Clinton's old ad against Obama. Who would you rather have?
Oh, gee,
remember
yeah.
that? Who would you rather have ready to answer the phone at 3 a.m.?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess, it's not in 4K, so I guess they wouldn't want to use it anyway. But that one's off the table.
Yeah.
That's here, and the guy who is running against him, who is a deeply flawed person, just faced an assassination attempt. That's where we are in America today. Play the other side. What if it's not inertia? What if what's going to come next is the heat boiling over? What do you think that would look like? Like, let's play fictional future for a minute.
That's hard for me to do, and I'm not sure I can. It could be a case of the police can't contain violence that now is breaking out between people who are partisans of one side or the other. The police are incapable of handling it. So in that way, it could be akin to what happened in the some of the Soviet bloc states when in 1989, when enormous crowds would appear, and either the police would either side with the protesters, or they just were completely outnumbered. There was nothing they could do. They were completely outnumbered. But that had a nice peaceful ending. But what if they're completely outnumbered, and that just means that we just keep going at each other until somebody raises a white flag? I mean, I don't want to live in that.
The thing I don't understand about this, and especially the extent to which some people almost fetishize it, is that, yes, there's been political sorting. Texas and Florida have gotten more red, California and New York have gotten more blue, but we still all live together with each other. What does an American Civil War in the 21st century even mean if it's along political lines? How would you go about doing that? Do all the right wingers flood the zone to Texas, and it's sort of like
But this is why I think it's
India and
implausible.
Pakistan's formation, which was pretty darn bloody and awful, in which populations just shift? I don't see how the mechanics of it play out.
That's one of the reasons I think it's implausible. But the main reason is that we tend to hear the loudest voices. And I think there are a lot of voices out there who say, okay, look, I don't like Trump either, but for heaven's sake, I like Trump more than I like shooting my neighbor in the head. So I mean, that's why I think it probably won't happen.
What gives you the most cause in some dark moments for optimism about our country? Because there's muddling along and momentum getting us through, and this too shall pass. Not exactly an optimistic posture.
No, that's true. But I think, in the last 10 years or so, there's been a shifting of what's called the Overton window, where I do think it's become possible to have conversations about topics that have really been closed up to now. And foreign policy is a big example of that. That we have a war party that is absolutely bipartisan, and their governing assumptions are just not challenged. They're not challenged on MSNBC any more than they are on Fox News. But now all of a sudden, there are more and more people saying, I don't accept the way you're framing this issue. Either we bomb these people or we starve them with sanctions. There are more and more people saying, but maybe there's a third option. Maybe we don't do A or B. And that up to now hasn't really been allowed. Like, you have the opinions, you have the options that the New York Times and Fox News have defined for you. And if you're somewhere in there, in the Mitt Romney, Hillary Clinton axis of evil, then that's all right. But if you're over here, well, that's not acceptable. But there are increasingly a lot of people over here and over here who are looking at each other and saying, well, wait a minute, hold on a minute. We're both against this horrible bipartisan foreign policy establishment. So I see more voices like that. And
they're coming from the left and the right.
And the right, yep. And also, I think what happened with COVID has made some people just sleepwalked through it, weren't changed by it at all. But some people were profoundly shaken by it because they realized it was BS and that the official experts were full of it. And now they don't know what to do. Now they're very disoriented because I had always been taught, trust the expert. I mean, why wouldn't you, right? I mean, When it comes to like flying an airplane, I trust the pilot. You know, I mean, it's natural to think that way. But they observed this, and now I think their minds are open to the next time they tell me the official line on something, I'm gonna question it. Like Pierre Corey is a physician who became well known during COVID because he had some dissident opinions about it. And he said, I would read in the newspaper what they were writing about COVID, and it was so wrong, I just couldn't believe it. He said, but that was the moment when I thought, when they're writing about something that I'm professionally qualified to evaluate, I can see that they're wrong. But how many times have they written about something I know nothing about, and I've just assumed that they're right? And I think more people are having that. And that healthy skepticism to me is a very favorable thing.
Dr. Drew was on the show, and he called this, he said there was a term for this. It was like Gelman amnesia or something like that. It was, yes. Whenever anyone reads in the newspaper or its equivalent these days about the things that they really deeply understand, they're in their actual area of true expertise. They're like, they got all this wrong. It's like when doctors watch TV shows about medicine. My dad's a surgeon. He can't watch any show about medicine.
Yeah,
He's
right.
like, this is all a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
They would never do that way. I can't watch this. This is just laughable. I can't watch it. I don't care if House is fun and cool. I can't watch it. And yet not as many people as one would expect leap to the lesson that doctor did. It's like, wait a second. I'm not the only expert that is probably getting really confused when they open up the newspaper.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This has been this transformation that's taken place in media too, in that it has centralized more over the recent years with the social media companies and their large servers being the place where we interact. But we live still in a fundamentally, structurally, much more decentralized information landscape today than we did 30, 50 years ago.
No question about it. Yeah.
You've made, you've we were saying before we got on the show, I said, you're like the libertarian podfather. We had Adam Curry on the show, the podfather.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy.
You've been in the space putting these ideas about liberty and your knowledge about history out there into the world for a long time. What has it taught you about getting ideas that you believe are good out there into the world, and also how to interact with people who you want to come to your side but who are not on your side right now?
Yeah, well, I think about people I feel like I can speak to most easily because they are where I used to be. So I used to be like a middle-of-the-road GOP guy. Like the person who most annoys me today is what I used to be. So if I run into one of those people, I at least know what drove me out of that. So maybe I can like fast forward them through quickly by just saying that to them, that kind of thing. And that comes from when I was in high school. I would tutor other students a lot during study hall, and particularly in math, because everybody would say they hated math, they couldn't understand it. And I would think, in teaching these people this math, I'm going to use the arguments or I'm going to explain to them in a way that if it had been explained to me this way, I would have got it immediately. I'll just tell it to them that way. And I had coaches telling me, so-and-so is going to be disqualified. We really want him to play. You got to help him with math. And I would do it. So I brought that to podcasting, and I brought that to trying to reach people who, like I had Pat Buchanan on the Tom Woods Show. And now Pat wrote speeches for Richard Nixon about why it was righteous to be in the Vietnam War. And I said to him,
talk about having a bad take.
Yeah. So I said, look, Pat, you're a culture war guy. You're concerned about a lot of moral issues. You're concerned about the size of the federal government and the spending and all that. But the Vietnam War accelerated all of that. It accelerated the counterculture in the U.S. It pitted parents against kids. It did all these sorts of things that you're against. And then when all is said and done, they went communist anyway. And it wasn't the end of the world. So wouldn't it have been better just not to do it? And he came this close to agreeing with me. And I thought, I'm never going to get Richard Nixon's speechwriter to agree with me. But that was the best effort I could put into it. But one thing I found is that to some degree, if you really want to blow up, you have to appease the algorithms. And I've just never cared about that. And one of my problems is, for a long time, I stayed old school podcasting, audio only. And then I saw all my friends had video, so I thought, all right, I'll add video. But the problem was, for 9 years on YouTube, I would put just a still shot and the audio of my show, and YouTube hates that. We are not an audio platform, we're a video platform. And listeners hate that, because they click on it, they realize there's no video, and they bounce. So what does that tell YouTube? Nobody likes Tom Woods. So now that I have put video on my channel, I can't get any traction with it, because YouTube has said, look, buddy, we're sorry, but everybody tells us they hate you. But my audio listening numbers tell me otherwise. So if I have somebody on who is very well known and people are interested in, then the numbers just shoot right up, just automatically. I'm not sending it to my newsletter. I'm not posting it on Facebook. It just organically just goes right up. But if I say, I want to have this unknown libertarian thinker on because he can tell us something really important about something, sinks to the bottom.
I have a topic that we should take hours more time with, but I'm going to raise it in a brief way if I can. You wrote a book many years ago called How the Catholic Church Built Civilization.
Western civilization,
Western
yes.
civilization. One of the things that I have been struggling with and in my own intellectual evolution over the years is, the concerns about Western civilization sort of shrunk for me as an idea as I became more like libertarian and was like all into Ron Paul and economics, and it's like, no, global trade, that's all that matters. What's this Western civilization stuff? This is sort of old, stodgy conservative talk.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe as I've aged, maybe as the assumptions that maybe I was taking for granted have now become called into question, I find myself revisiting this question of Western civilization, or maybe just more broadly of civilization.
Yeah.
Because there's other civilizations that weren't technically in the West that arrived at the institutions we care about when we say Western civilization with a TM. Why does Western civilization matter, and how do you think about today the importance of this tradition or this set of principles that are underneath that phrase, as someone that cares about liberty?
I think when people ask about Western civilization, what they normally get as an answer is somebody reciting the principles of the Enlightenment. But there's more to Western civilization than just the Enlightenment. But even when wrong, the Enlightenment was sometimes trying to grab for the right things. So there's nothing wrong with science per se. And in fact, the longest chapter in my Western civilization Catholic Church book is on science, because I know I have a long row to hoe on that one. No one's going to believe me. They all think that the church was burning scientists or whatever. And so I've gone through and said, actually, since the 1950s, the consensus in history of science circles is that that's not correct, that the church actually helped to foster science for a whole number of reasons. So I put all that in there. In fact, there's a company, they used to be called the Teaching Company. They're now called, I think, the Great Courses. And they sell courses taught by academics you can listen to in your car. And before I don't know if it was before, at least around the time I wrote that book, I listened to their course on the history of science, because they're not like teaching you a liberal or conservative or whatever kind of perspective. They just want to teach you a bland course so that they can sell it to as many people as possible. So if even they say that the gripe against the church on the grounds of science is wrong, then I know it's just mainstream. And that's exactly what they said. So that's a separate question. But so I do care about science, but I don't. What's gone wrong with it is scientism, where we think science is a good thing. Science draws information and knowledge from empirical data. Therefore, all knowledge comes that way. All knowledge comes through experimentation or whatever. And if it doesn't, then it's not worth anything. Or it's if somebody is a scientist, that means we just need to sit back and listen. And like with Anthony Fauci, maybe he has something to say about immunology, I don't know, but he doesn't have anything to say about, if I shut down society, how do I balance the collateral damage of that against the presumed health benefits? He doesn't take any class that teaches him that. It's complete superstition to assign to him the right to make a determination like that. And so what's happened is sometimes Western civilization has a great principle and it gets distorted, and like Marxism is a distortion of a lot of great things in Western civilization. It's a distortion of Christianity. It's a distortion of charity. I wrote the book about the Catholic Church in Western civilization because there are so many things we take for granted today that we don't even think about that actually we would have only because of the church. And an example of that is the way we think about charity. We think about charity not as, I'm going to help you out, man, but when you get clean and get on your feet, you're going to build an annex on my house. That is not how we think of it. I'm going to help you because you're a human being, and there's no expectation of reciprocity. And when you get on your feet, you don't have to build a building with my name all over it. But if you look at ancient Greece and Rome, that absolutely was the expectation. The idea that you were just going to give somebody help and that's it. This is not how they thought of it. But it's how we think of it, isn't it? When you talk about charity, that is how we think of it. Well, so where'd we get that from? Aristotle? Where'd we get that from? We got that from the Christian tradition. So to me, I would say there is so much that is good in the Christian world that even people who aren't religious, I think today, are starting to kind of pick that out. Like, yeah, I'm not sure I believe any of this mumbo jumbo, but now that I see what happens to society as you move away from it, I'm starting to think maybe I shouldn't cheer its collapse.
Yeah, this is the rise of this meme and sort of like intellectual, the formerly dubbed intellectual dark web types, from Peter Boghossian to Konstantin Kisin and etc. Cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
That, okay, if we want to maintain the kind of, small L liberal order of freedom, prosperity, individual autonomy, dignity, we should at least not try to actively burn down this tradition and this sort of perhaps roots of the tree that, we spent a bunch of time whacking at for a long time as far as intellectuals go. And now it's like, I didn't really want to burn the whole thing down, really.
Right. Well,
or maybe I did, and that was stupid. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. I didn't realize. I mean, it really is like a house, and some of the walls are just there for, to separate the rooms, but other walls are holding the house up. And maybe you walk in there, you don't know which wall is which, so you don't start taking a wrecking ball to them. You see, well, maybe this institution is necessary to keep the civilization going, the same way that wall keeps up the house. And then also the way the Christian world keeps, I think, a very mature eye on the subject of the created world. On the one hand, we don't become obsessed with material things, but on the other hand, we recognize that the material world is a good thing. So even a monk who gives up so much to go in a monastery, he's not doing that because the things of the world are evil. He's doing that because they're good, and it's a sacrifice for him to give them up. And so, I mean, one of the great heresies in church history was, it originally was Manichaeanism, but there are other versions of it, the Cathars, and they would say that there were two gods, basically. There was a good God and an evil God, and the good God was the God of spirit, and the evil God was the God of material nature. So obviously, if you believe in that theory, you're not really going to be interested in art, architecture. These are all evil things. And of course, you're also not going to believe in the sacraments or the incarnation of Christ, because how dare you say that God would take on an evil body, or that our souls would be nourished through the means of physical things. This is all wicked and evil. So I know a lot of people probably think the church thinks that the world is... When they say that, they mean the enticements of sin in the world. But the church fought against that heresy and taught that it was a heresy. And as I say, you see that their view is that the incarnation proves that it can't be evil. Because why would God take physical form and interact with the physical things of the world if those were evil? And then you see in the high Middle Ages what that means. The cathedrals, Paul Johnson called them perhaps the greatest achievements in the entire theater of art. You know, those aren't created by people who hate the material world, and they want to beautify it. And then I look at our world and I think, why can't we seem incapable of building beautiful buildings anymore? And it's not just that they're more expensive. I don't believe that. We can blow a lot of money on a lot of frivolous things. But it's almost like everywhere we turn, everything is meant to just grind us down. Everything is meant to make us feel despair and nihilism, as you say, right? Everywhere we look. And I didn't, whatever other problems I had throughout the centuries of Christendom, that wasn't one of them.
Are you a practicing Catholic? Was that what motivated the book?
Oh, yeah, I had just converted. Well, not just. I converted in 1996, but I had wanted to read a book called "How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization," because everybody would say that casually in my circles. Everybody would say, "Well, the church built Western civilization." I would say, "Oh, that's an intriguing claim. I wonder how they justify it." And I couldn't find a book. And Hilaire Belloc has a book called Europe and the Faith. And I thought, that'll tell me. It was not a helpful book at all. So I thought, I don't believe this. I have to write this book in order to be able to read it. That was actually how the project began. I wanted to read this book, so therefore I had to write it.
We are in a time where among the different splintering sects of politics, there is one that has even self-identifies as being Christian nationalists. Now, there's what media critics and the New York Times says is Christian nationalism, but there are people who really do believe we would actually be better off under something more like a legal Christian regime of some kind. I don't spend a lot of time in that world.
I honestly don't know what, because Catholic traditionalism, that where I've been identified, has already had its own version of that for so long. So I never really felt like I had to read what these Protestants were saying about, because we already have that. We already have people who advocate that. We have people who say we should establish a monarchy or whatever it is. So I mean, I'm well aware of that.
To the person out there who is feeling despair, who sees what's happened today, the assassination attempt on President Trump, and who might be sucked towards an authoritarian type of sentiment as a result, a sense of we need more strength, we need more solidness, we need someone to bring order to the chaos. What do you have to say to them about the dangers that lie ahead in embracing a structure that would be more like that?
Well, I could say I understand why they feel that way, because they feel like we've tried everything else. What's the worst that can happen? But geez, anytime you ask that question, what's the worst that can happen? I can think of a lot of really bad things that will make us long yearn for the year 2024. I had... Well, I still have numerous Catholic friends who favor a regime where, not that there would be a union of church and state, which has never really existed, but that nevertheless the state would give support to the church in some way. And I say to them, do you not remember that for centuries secular rulers were naming the Catholic bishops? Like, could you imagine Barack Obama or Joe Biden picking who the bishops are? Like, because that's the way that's going to go. If you go down that road, that's going to happen. So I know that the ideal version of that would be awesome. You get a really, really, really solid guy, and he picks really solid people. But unfortunately, the way politics works, most of the time, solid guys aren't attracted into it. Now, I know we have Javier Milei. I mean, I know that that's true. But the reason we know about Javier Milei is that he's an outlier. Like I could name 15 countries right now and ask you to name me the head of state. We'd have no idea, right? Because they're all the same. So I would say that I have a pretty good record when it comes to predicting whether a political outcome is going to be good or bad. And politics, as important as it can be on some things, is not ever going to be the ultimate answer. If the society is corrupt, you can have all the politicians in the world you want. And that's what the left has been great at. it hasn't necessarily immediately gone into the politics. It's we're going to pave the way. We're going to grab the culture. We're going to get into the universities. We're going to get into the arts. We're going to get into all the various institutions, even into the bureaucracies. And then we'll be in a position to grab power. But if we just grab it, but every single cultural institution is against us, that's going to be a tough road ahead. So yeah, it's going to mean hard work. I'd love for there to be some simple solution. You know, a Caesar's in charge, he fixes everything. Oh my gosh, if that would be that easy, that'd be great. Unfortunately, we have hard work ahead of us. But the building of Western civilization was hard work. The building of an American society out of the wilderness was hard work. You know, our ancestors, that's all they knew was hard work. So yeah, we have hard work ahead of us, but there are way more of us out there who believe the way you believe than you thought a few years ago. And so why don't we roll up our sleeves and work together?
I ask this of every guest. We call this Dad Saves America, and it's because I believe that that's a role we play as men that's really powerful. We help shape the lives of our kids, and if we do it right, we arm them with the capability to survive after we have gone, to thrive in a free society, and I hope want to keep it that way. How do you think about your role in the American story?
Whoa. I thought you were going to talk about my role as a dad of my 5 girls. No.
No. I
Okay.
mean, you can take it there if you wish, but in the big picture things, in the Saves America part.
Well, what I would like to do is I'd like it if people of influence read, absorb, and agree with some of the things I've written and then take them somewhere. That's what I'd like. So when in 2010 my book Nullification came out, that was about the states resisting unconstitutional federal laws, and it made me happy when state legislators would read that and governors would read that and invite me for breakfast, and you know, and there was an ABC News report about legislators are reading a book. And I thought, is it mine? You know, so things like that make me happy. Or, you know, my book on the West and the church. I mean, that's been translated into probably 15 languages. So, you know, I've maybe bolstered the faith of people I can't even communicate with, and that makes me feel happy. Most of the causes I believe in are losers in the short run. But so I'm not like when Javier Milei, who got elected in Argentina, like I don't know how to process this. Like I don't even know what to do now, really, you know. But I haven't been looking for short-term instant gratification because I'm not going to get it with the things I believe in. Everything I believe in is going to take a long slog. But that is kind of what I've hoped to do. And then lately, ever since COVID happened, I mean, you know, obviously, as you know, I still do the Tom Woods Show. We talk about a wide variety of things, but I was so demoralized during COVID by how I saw so many people acting and how readily they just threw their lives away. Like they weren't even, like I value my life. So I wanted to see, am I making these sacrifices for a good reason? Like, show me the data. And there were just so many people who just rolled over. Like, why don't you care about your life? You're not even going to look it up. So it annoyed me. And so then I thought maybe I should like kind of break off a chunk of my time and devote that to people who are already on board with me with the ideas. You know, they've read their Hayek and they've read their Mises and they know all the stuff. But now they want to know, well, what should I do? And so one thing I've been focused on is I could have on my tombstone, he recorded 7,000 podcast episodes, or I could strive for something a little bit more than that. And so what I've done for the past couple of years, I started something called the Tom Woods School of Life. And it is about everything except libertarian theory. So there's nothing about how would Lockean homesteading theory apply on the moon, or if the cannibalism is consensual, would libertarians be okay with that? Like there's none of that. It is entirely about how do you prosper under a hostile regime? Because we have in our ranks a ton of really smart people. And they also tend to be really smart in one particular area. We should be putting our heads together. So I've been doing things like, so in my School of Life, we had Mark and Joanne Skousen teach personal finance, for example. Well, that's very good for people. But all kinds of things you would like, how do you educate your kids in this hostile regime? And you say, but I can't homeschool them. We both work. we're going to figure this out for you because we have to do it. We're going to figure it out. So things like that, or how do you start your own business that no Anthony Fauci can shut down? All these kinds of practical things that will make you stronger and unbreakable. That's all we talk about. And then on top of that, every week we break up into the same small groups, and we have entrepreneur groups, we have fitness groups, and we find that if you just are accountable to somebody, and people in our groups, they become like best of friends. They come to my conference every year and they get to meet each other in person. Best of friends. They all wish the best for each other. And they meet every week and they're struggling with something, but somebody else knows the answer, or somebody knows the person they need to talk to. And so every week they make progress. And so in the fitness group, I have a friend who runs a fitness group, who runs my whole group program, and he said there's a guy who would show up, and every week it would be a report that he failed. Oh, I ate some cookies at somebody's wedding, and he's always reporting a failure. But after 8 months, who had by far made the most progress? It was that guy. Just because he showed up and showed up and showed up. So this is I feel like what we're doing in this community is way more important than writing angry letters to the editor or anything like that. This is for people who feel like books are important, but I read the books. The thing we're lacking is not one more book. It's people working with each other, putting their heads together, and building something out of the ashes. And so that's what I'm doing now.
That is so deeply American. It is so in the spirit of Alexis de Tocqueville and
Yes.
Democracy in America to not wait by for the aristocrats or the elite to do things, but to just roll up your sleeves and do it. I'm so happy to hear about that, Tom. And on a dark day, you brought some light to this conversation. Thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Thank you, John.